Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to 21st Century HR Live. I'm your host, Lars Schmidt, and today is Friday. Happy Friday. I don't know if that day has meaning to anybody anymore, but it is, in fact, Friday. I verified with the calendar, so, small wins. Anyway, today is the end of week one of 21st Century HR Live. So thank you for all of you who've been tuning in this week. It's been great having conversations over the course of this week. And right now, this is a pilot show. It's a pilot program that's going to run through the end of May and is already booked out with guests through the end of May. So hugely grateful for everybody for making time to come on the show. And one thing just to remind you is this is an interactive show. So I'm going to be asking questions of the guests to get to know more about how they're dealing with life in quarantine and just everything that's going on right now. And then I want to make sure that I can bring some of your questions to the audience as well and the guests as well. So if you have questions wherever you're streaming this, add a question in the comments section, or if you're on Periscope, reply with a question, and I'll do my best to get those covered while we're on air. So today is a special day for the show. It's actually going to be a show within the show. So my guest today is Craig Fisher. He's the head of recruiting innovation for Allegis Global Solutions. He's a good friend. We've collaborated on the Cool Tools podcast and a range of things over the years. So every Friday is going to be a show with Craig called Office Hours. So it's a show within a show. We're going to basically recap the world of work, all things talent over the course of the last week, answer your questions, riff on random stuff from technology to tools to music. So with that setup, let me bring in my friend Craig Fisher. Craig, how are you, buddy?
Lars, how's it going? I'm great. Great to be here. Glad to see you.
Yeah, so Office Hours. So this is the show within a show, a mini show, a featurette, if you will. Since this is the very first Office Hours with Craig Fisher, I figure if there is a single viewer out there who may not know who Craig Fisher is, who is Craig Fisher? Take us inside of you, man. What are you all about? What's your background? What do you do? Let's start there.
Right. So I'm a 25-year recruiting industry veteran. I've owned a staffing agency. I've led talent acquisition teams at the Fortune 500 level, and I am now the head of recruiting innovation for Allegis Global Solutions. Been with that company for 5 years, multiple roles, and what we do is we're the RPO for multiple Fortune 5 and Fortune 100 companies, as well as the MSP. That's what my division of Allegis Group does. And I run a team that does EVP, employer branding, recruitment marketing, diversity strategy, and sourcing strategy, as well as technology suggestions for their tech stack, called the Ignite Consulting Group within Allegis. I also run the largest recruiting conference in Texas and the Southwest, called TalentNet. And I do another podcast called Inside Talent. And you can find out about that at insidetalent.org. That I could go on forever, Lars. There's lots more things.
Craig has a lot of slashes in his title, and you always have. Is the hardest working man in recruiting. One interesting thing, since this will be a bit of a anthropological experiment we can have with the show. Since Office Hours is going to be an every Friday show, I'm going to be going with the full let it flow and grow beard. As I'm in quarantine, this is probably about 6 weeks worth right now, and I'm just going to see what happens if I don't do much to it. I will groom it. I'm not going to just, not going to go caveman, but I'm gonna let it go. Craig's a manicure guy. He's like a regular beard guy. I'm not a regular beard guy, so for me, this is like an experiment. Craig is a trim guy, so we'll be able to see like what happens over time. Is you have one manicured beard and one wily beard. And,
well,
the episodes it's going to take for us to really have some nice contrast there.
I think in one of these episodes, I may set up skateboards on the back wall and see if people can actually tell which one of us is which.
You know what I may do? I may have to take a photo, and we could do like a Zoom virtual. You could put your green screen up and throw this behind you, and we'll just
It's not a bad idea. Yeah,
Yeah,
we could totally do
we
that.
can even swap our titles on the things that are really mess with people.
Oh, come on.
Greg and I
Brilliant.
are known to do some silly things. We're not afraid of silly. So
That's right.
yeah, that could be interesting. So
Very
one of the things, this is, and again, just as a reminder for folks that are just tuning in, this is an interactive show. So you have questions for, Craig or myself about any and everything related to the world of work. Feel free to drop those in the comment section and we'll cover those on air. So Craig, first to you, I figure one of the things we can do in the show is really, recap some of the news and trends in, really all things talent, all things work, recruiting, etc. From the previous week. So when you look back on the past week, what things stand out to you?
Yeah, so I've had some really interesting conversations with TA leaders from some pretty big companies about how do we go back to work? What happens when we get asked to come back to the office? How paranoid are people going to be? And I think right now in the world, you have a mix of people who are very concerned about getting sick. The probably smart people who are very concerned about getting other people sick, right? So I appreciate those folks, and a lot of people who think that there's nothing to be worried about. And when I go to the grocery store and 75% of the people have masks on and 25% of the people are trying to get right next to you on the salad dressing aisle, with no mask.
It's a popular aisle too. You got.
Oh my gosh!
You gotta look out.
And the list my wife sends with me is insane. So I'm looking for Greek dressing, and the most random thing seems like forever. It's maybe 30 seconds, but in the grocery store, it's like a horror show. But imagine being in an office in cubicles next to, your workmate with no sneeze guard. And I mean, I think people are going to have legitimate concerns, and I think businesses are going to feel serious social pressure for a while. But unfortunately, I feel like at some point when we think we've got the safety thing down and nailed down, that employers are going to say, "Yeah, everything's fine. You got to come back."
Yeah, honestly, I've been for the open source Google Doc. I added a new section at the beginning of this week for return to work plans and guidelines, and so I've been digging into a lot of those, reviewing those, and the complexity is mind-boggling, right? Like if anybody out there thinks you're just going to flip the switch and people are going to come back in the office, you're not at all paying attention. Like the way that this is going to happen, I think one of the most light bulb moment docs that I saw is there was a crowdsourced Google Doc or a crowdsourced resource that I converted into a Google Doc of general counsels, mostly in tech, big global companies. And they put together, I think it was about a 27-page document with all the considerations around, returning to the office. And it was mind-boggling. The level of complexity, being able to test, being able to have the right PPE, being able to maintain social distancing in the office, looking at janitorial staff, looking at meetings, understanding employees that might have pre-existing conditions, or kids at home, or are caretakers for elderly parents who, can't come back into the office. There's so many considerations that have to be factored in that, companies are going to have to find a way to sort that out. And so a lot of them are developing kind of a tiered and phased plan through how they're going to do it. But it's going to be incredibly complicated. And even when you think about maintaining social distances in the office, looking at tech companies and startups, for example, the open floor plan is what people love. Everybody is jammed next to each other on desks. You can't do that anymore. If you bring people into an office, you've got to maintain social distancing. So how do you do that? You can't fit the same amount of people back into your office under your existing floor plan. You have to redesign your floor plan. So that's just one of a ton of considerations that companies have to consider when they're beginning to bring people back into the office.
Yes, and I think there's going to be a pretty big cottage industry of space planners, right, to reconfigure offices. Like that's going to be a real thing. And I think we're also going to have shifts, right? We're not going to all be there on the same days. There's no other way around it, right?
Right.
And so it's like what the hotel industry has done to lease out their space to companies that are ramping up their call centers like CVS, right? They are getting these big call center spaces from the hotels that aren't booking anything right now. And it's a shared environment kind of thing. I think we're going to see a lot more of this sharing and collaboration between organizations to make this work the right way.
Yeah, and let's talk about that for a minute. I know that so Craig and I, before 21st Century HR Live officially launched, we were playing around with this concept of office hours. We're doing it on Instagram, and one of the things that we talked about that I know you've been involved with is like talent share programs, and specifically, I think there was an example that we talked about with Marriott and CVS. But why don't you give the viewers just a quick overview of that, because I thought that was really interesting collaboration that in January, nobody would have even, considered. And now we're starting to see that scale. So we'll walk me through that program.
Yeah. So, obviously the hospitality industry is not hiring right now, and they've had to furlough a lot of people. And so they got together, Hilton and Marriott and a few other companies got together with companies like CVS, who are, hiring in waves of mass hiring right now, so that CVS could take on some of those furloughed workers for these increased jobs that they've got due to this current situation. And it's a kind of a wild sharing of resources and ideas. And these furloughed workers who go to work for CVS, when the furlough is over, can go back to their other employer. They have an agreement on this, or they might find themselves with a career at CVS. So it's a win-win, and it's an amazing example of global collaboration.
Yeah, and I want to start bringing in some questions from the viewers right now. The first one is from Mary Vales, watching on YouTube. She's curious when it comes to defining the purpose from employees, particularly when it comes to returning to work and getting employees who are working remotely, obviously like many are, back into the office. Like how do you kind of address some of those questions for employees that just say, can I just continue working from home?
So I had a really good conversation this week with Jim D'Amico from Celanese. He's the head of TA for Celanese Corp, which is a huge chemical company, right? And he says that his team is having their daily water cooler talks remotely, like a lot of teams are right now. And I think it's a real benefit. So my team gets on every morning and we do a 15-minute daily stand-up where we don't talk about work at all. And we don't talk about, anything too dark. We try to keep it light. We have a theme every day. And a lot of companies are doing this. And that kind of collaboration seems to be really working and helping people with their mental health and their wellness issues being cooped up. I think employers are going to start incorporating that sort of thing into the daily work environment from the office and from home. And hopefully we'll be able to collaborate like this. We've proven that you can be agile remotely. And we know from lots of studies, Harvard Business Review, that remote workers are generally more productive than people in offices. So I think there's proof here that it can be a blended model. And I think employees will get on board with that, because you can't just not ever have anyone come into an office. But we also know that, boy, there's a lot of money in the real estate invested there. So something's got to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality we have to be prepared for is that there are some employees who are not going to come back in an office.
With legitimate concern, right?
Yeah. And I mean, when you think about it, there's so many, the way that we're all experiencing this is such a dynamic and individual thing, right? So, as an HR leader, as a business leader, we don't necessarily know which of our employees have underlying health conditions. We don't know which ones might be a caretaker to an older parent. We don't know which ones may have, children who are having complications with school or this transition that they need to invest extra time in. And so I think what'll be really interesting is, you had a lot of perhaps old school business leaders who were like, oh, you have to be in the office to be working, and I need to see you to know you're productive, and just all these legacy mindsets. Now that executive has been working remote for months, right?
That's right.
And the company has proved that they can be productive. They can continue moving things forward by not having people in an office. So I think it's going to be an interesting mix of employees who are not able or willing to come back into an office. And let's be honest about this. I mean, this situation is going to be unfolding. This isn't a short-term thing. This is going to be a medium to longer-term thing, and we've got to be prepared for that. So we're going to have employees that are not willing or able to come back in the office. We're also going to have some companies, as everybody's looking at, containing costs as much as possible, realizing, we don't need to be spending these millions of dollars on this commercial real estate when we don't have as many people coming back. And even if people are coming back, because we have to maintain social distancing in the workplace, we have to reconfigure the entire office space so that we can maintain that. And so now maybe you were at capacity before, now you're going to have to shrink that down to, a third of that space, or more in order to maintain social distancing. So even if all of your employees were willing and able to come back into the office, for a lot of companies, you're not going to be able to fit them maintaining social distance inside the same space with the same configuration. So you're going to have shifts, rotations, or some sort of a flexible arrangement to make that happen.
Lars, there are a lot of people who want to go back to the office. And so at the opposite end of this equation is there are people who don't really thrive working from home and are going stir crazy and really need that office environment. And so I think what we might see is the WeWorks of the world becoming sort of the manager of all of these office spaces, and they become shared work environments. Big corporations were already leasing space in certain towns where they have several employees, but no major hub from WeWork. And so, we've got an office for quantum work in North Carolina, and their big WeWork there had several major corporations with big parts of that floor, which is really cool. And so I think we might see more of that. And that's sort of one of the solutions to the real estate problem. And then it's kind of a come and go as you please thing. And those people that have to get out can.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's going to be really interesting to follow, at least in the US, is, we have all of these different dynamics in place. We have what is supposedly a national framework for kind of reopening, the country, and you have to have these benchmarks and see these trends and, diagnosis and all these kind of things. But that's a framework, that's a guideline. It's up to the governors of each state to actually determine when they'll open and how they'll open. And so as we're seeing now in states like Georgia, some governors are not abiding by that and opening things up on their schedule.
That's right.
The interesting piece. So when that first started happening, I started thinking about just from a business standpoint and a liability standpoint, right? Like, it's great for the president or the governor to say, like, yes, you could open, but if I'm, the CEO of a company and I rush into opening things too fast, I don't have the right safeguards in place around return to work, I'm opening up some serious liability for my company. And I saw, I don't think that there's nothing formal on this yet, but I saw that the administration was actually having conversations with business to create, potentially create a waiver liability for businesses to say, like, you will have protection, you will not be liable if you open up and your employees get sick. I'm just, did you read anything about that? I'm curious to get your take on that, because that seems like an absolute, disaster for employees.
Yeah, I've seen a lot about that. And I don't think that these liability waivers hold any water. I'm going to be honest. I think what we're going to find is that this evolves. Organizations already have built-in liability waivers in a lot of their employee agreements. And that's a standard thing that's been, going on for a long time. You agree to, yes, do these things and to not do these other things. But we're going to see a lot more employers reissuing employment agreements that have some of that language in it, but there's going to have to be a standard, because right now I think that lawsuits will abound if we don't agree on things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a real risk, and I think it's such an uncertain time here, because we just don't know how it's going to play out, when it's going to play out, what the duration is going to be. I mean, you're in Texas. What's the conversation, there like around, opening back up? Other than you've got officials saying, certain people dying is price to pay to open the economy. That,
Yeah.
a little worrisome.
It's interesting. Philosophically speaking, I don't see how you can feel good about saying that in a press conference, right? I mean, let's not say that anymore, right? That's a bad thing.
People are going to die, but the economy's got to go on, and it's a price to
Right.
pay.
We don't have to say those words.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be me because
Yeah.
I protected. It's going to be the hourly employees who are going to force to go back into a place to clean your gym equipment and cut your hair.
Yeah, and so Governor Abbott has said that we've got a plan for opening things back up, and starting on the 27th, certain businesses will be open for business, but it'll still be you have to get things from the outside, that sort of staged effect. But I think most of the states now have their full plan ready to go, but they're just releasing it a little bit at a time and not releasing the full plan. So it will probably evolve as we see how things go. Yeah. And I think you'll see things start to normalize a little bit, but we're going to have some setbacks as well. So for instance, the stock market, surged, and we're going to have 2 more major collapses, I'm guessing, before things get better towards the end of the summer.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this whole idea of a second wave and what may come, and I think if you just, again, like, we're not scientists, we're not epidemiologists, we're not making predictions, we're just curious people who've been following the news and the trends and making our own opinions based on that. But it's just it's hard to have a lot of confidence in our situation when we have a leader who's talking about shooting UV rays under our skin and drinking Clorox to to get healed. I mean, I think that doesn't inspire a lot of confidence, and it makes us feel that we've got to be hunkered down as long as we're able to. And I think I've mentioned this several times in the show this week, like, the ability to work from home and be remote is a true privilege. And so I don't want to take that for granted. I think that there's a lot of employees that don't have that privilege, and they're forced to go about their jobs and go into an office and expose themselves. And so I don't want to make light of that, because I think people who work in roles that we have or are able to work remotely, that's a real privilege, and it's a privilege that allows us to keep our families safer. But there's a lot of people, again, especially with these reopening plans, now they're going to be forced to go back into an office and commute and just expose themselves to infection. And so that's a real concern that I think, again, will take another period of weeks to see how that all plays out.
It's a shame, because even though we supposedly have these funds for people to get unemployment quickly and things like that, it's not actually happening. I've heard from so many people in our industry, just recruiters, who have been laid off and have filed for the unemployment and are talking about nothing coming until at least May or later. And so they might not have any choice if they get a job that says you've got to be in an office. That's where you have to go, because they're going to run out of money. Yeah. And not everybody has a 401k that they can start dipping into. Not everybody has any sort of resource to, family or whatever, to get living expenses from. So there's not much of a choice for those folks. And that's the tough thing. So my company, Allegis Global Solutions, has been putting together a really good database of resources for employers on how to deal with these things, how to open back up, how to start getting normal again. And so if you go to allegisglobalsolutions.com, the link to the database is right there on the front page. And I highly recommend checking that out if you're an employer, to understand some of the ways that are being innovated by some really good organizations. So check that out.
Yeah, so definitely check that out. I think we will have, in these office hours sections, we're going to have tips on tools and recommendations, as well as a recap of the news for the week. So from a tool perspective, any new tool or techs on your radar this week?
So I did a really interesting hack. When I was interviewing Jim D'Amico, we were trying to do it over Zoom, but I don't have the Zoom license where you can call in from a phone. So we were getting some serious static over his audio. and we had to try it again several times. And what I ended up doing was using Google Voice on my computer to call him on his mobile phone, and that got us a good audio connection. We kept the Zoom meeting going, and it was pretty much real time for audio and video. And I recorded the whole thing with Camtasia and had that record my system audio. So I got the Zoom meeting video and the system audio very clear, and it worked spectacularly well. So if you're in the habit of doing these types of interviews with people and you don't have StreamYard and you're trying to use Zoom, there's a workaround for the audio.
Craig can hack his way into combining any possible systems that exists, and I've seen that firsthand many times. So that's a solid hack.
Thank you. Yes,
I want to. We're obviously, this episode was fairly heavy, talking about return to work plans and talking about rushing back into things in second waves and a lot of topics that aren't necessarily uplifting and enlightening. So I do want to end on a high note. We have a segment on the show called One Good Thing. And in One Good Thing, basically I want you to share any one good thing from your past week. It could be something you've read, some conversation you've had, anything that when you look back on your past week stands out to you.
So in my world, I moved to a new house on March 27th, which was harrowing, having movers come and touch all your things and try to do that process. Fortunately, it was just down the street, so it wasn't very far. But Lars and I have been talking a lot about one of these days we're going to go live and share our home gyms with the world. And last weekend, I finally got my home gym set up, and I think Lars saw some pictures of it. And yesterday, it's been warm enough here in Texas that my wife and I actually got into our pool for the first time ever. New house, new pool, never been in it, which was fun. And last night, we did a social distance backyard party with our neighbors to watch the NFL draft. So I think getting back to feeling a little normal has been really good for me, even though, this is not necessarily normal circumstances when I'm running around to restaurants and supermarkets with a mask on, looking like I'm going to rob the place.
Yeah. Well, and so I know you're a huge Cowboys fan. How do you feel about the pick?
CeeDee Lamb is my boy. I'm also a Sooner. So
yeah. Whoa, that's right. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So big day for me. That he's a great player. I've watched every game he's ever played, every minute of every game he's ever played. And he is a strong performer, can catch anything, goes high, goes across the middle. Really good, solid player. Good pick for the Cowboys.
Scouting report, Craig Fisher. Hopefully we'll have all this year. I don't know. We'll see. But whatever we do, they've got a solid receiver to lean on there.
That's right.
So, well, Craig, thanks so much for coming on. For all the viewers, thank you for tuning in. And again, this is Office Hours with Craig Fisher. This is going to be a weekly show within a show. Every Friday at noon Eastern, we'll be back. So, Craig, I'll give you the last word.
Lars, it's great to see your face again. I'm glad we practiced this a few times before we did this officially. And everybody, it's great to be here on Fridays. Catch up with us. It's going to be fun every time.
All right, everyone. Take care. Have a great weekend. Stay safe.